practice session.
Alrighty. Okay, good morning, everyone. Just actually counting my breath to be 60 so that we can technically start. Welcome to this edition. It's the second in the year for the WIGE-NAPE collaboration. And today we are bringing you a technical webinar. And I know that you're excited to listen to the conversation because beyond the reshape and the post-COVID discussions that we've had, this is as important, especially as we begin to emerge as geoscientists, not necessarily oil and gas explorers. So I'd like to welcome you to the session. Today's session is in collaboration with NAPE. It's actually a WIG event, and I'm honored to be your host. My name is Tubosan Falayo, and I am the Publicity Secretary of NAPE. Please confirm you can see my screen, just so I know that everyone is clear and can see.
Yeah, clear enough.
You can give me a thumbs up, it's fine. All right, great. So this is our agenda for today. We are going to be taking a safety moment. Then we'll have the president, the chairperson of WIGE, Mrs. Adedoja Ojalabi FNAPE, who would give us the opening remark. And she will tell us a bit about WIGE, the strides that we have made and how to join. We would introduce our speaker, the distinguished Dr. Understanding Aikulola. And then we would wrap up with your questions. What I would like to say is if you have questions during this presentation, please use the Q&A button, and you can also use the chat button to banter, connect with your friends, because now we are out of the four walls of our offices. And thereafter, we will take more announcements. I'll bring in the WIGE focal points for the LEARN group and also the president-elect of NAPE to do the appreciation. We'll take event photos and we'll have our closing remark from the NAPE presidents. So this may not be a first of energy transition that we have seen, but it is the first at a net zero emission attempts. So what this means to us is that as geoscientists, we are beginning to realize that our core competencies does not lie only as oil and gas explorers. We are actually earth explorers. This transition is peculiar because it brings in its way climate action, ozone layer depletion, sustainable development goals, holding businesses, our members' organization accountable for its progress, and a growing energy-centered globalization. It's on this note I'd like to welcome you and also open up the meeting to welcome all the distinguished executive, NAPE executive, WIGE executive, and you, importantly, our distinguished guests to this event. The next item on our agenda is now the safety moment, and we'll have Victoria to take it.
Thank you very much, Tubosan. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'll jump right into it. So our safety moment today is on escalating the levels of insecurity in our country. And like you all know, there's this increasing concern about abduction, violent outbreaks in almost every part of the country, causing an overwhelming state of panic, so to say, even to us and then to the agency in charge of security. Now it's now left to us to know that it's important that we prioritize the security of ourselves and our loved ones to at least to the top of the list of our to-do. To do that, we need to maintain that high level of vigilance. We have to stay proactive, bottom line. So I'll be sharing a few security tips that could help us at least achieve this. The one top on my list is know your environment. I know most of us are working from home, and so we don't really get out to see what's happening around us. But from time to time, we do step out to buy groceries and the likes. It's important that we take note of movements around us or any suspicious character. And once noted, you'd want to, report that to the appropriate authorities. Again, I would say, unless if it is absolutely necessary, you need not make that trip. Okay, especially when it happens, when you have to do it probably late at night or when it's unplanned. And even when you do that, you want to leave that message with only trustworthy family members, just in case. As always, we would say, maintain a low profile. You need not sing out or blow your trumpet of who you are. Stay low and remain low. For logos on t-shirts, on cars, and all of that, indicating where you work or where the society or the association you belong, you need not do all of that. You just want to play low. Again, I would say stay vigilant. And when you drive, as you approach any checkpoint, you have to be very extremely careful, because we have most of these special characters acting as security operatives, and you don't want to fall victim. I would also add that it's important that we stay updated with happenings in our environment via the social media. You want to at least put up your updates or notifications as it relates to security updates. And I'll close out by saying that it's important that you have emergency contacts handy, share them with your loved ones just in case. And these are pretty much all the security tips I know you probably know of or you've heard about, but it's important that you put very close to your chest. Thank you, and that'll be all. Over to you, Madam PS.
Thank you, Victoria. So I'll yield the floor over to Mrs. Adedoja Ojelabi to give us the opening remark and tell us about WIGE.
Thank you very much, Bosu, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining. My name is Adedoja Ojelabi, and I'm the chairperson for the Women in Geosciences and Engineering WIG. Today, we're very pleased to be starting one of our series. We call it the Changing Career Transition Series. And today's talk about carbon capture and utilization and storage actually ties into not only that part, but also the part about lower carbon for most of the companies, which is the new technology that most companies are adopting to lower the carbon footprint. But a little bit about WIG before we go on. WIG is a network. It started in 2011 and we're now 10 years old. It's really just a network for female professional geoscientists and engineers, also students, and we plan activities and programs to improve our technical know-how, our leadership qualities, and the career development activities. And we're trying to build value by building leaders and also growing our capabilities technically. We add value by creating a network for career development, improving our leadership and communication skills. We also provide advice, especially for the professionals and the students when we do mentoring activities to provide advice on career choices and career opportunities. We have mentoring, training, and empowerment programs to grow the necessary skills. We also advocate for women in leadership. So that's just a little bit about WIG. And some of our programs for this year. Next slide, please. Our theme for this year is Empower, Grow, and Thrive. And some of our programs for this year would be a collaboration with the Nigerian Content to have a survey for gender and diversity issues to gain some insight. Also, we've already had our International Women's Day webinar. We had a training event where we sponsored some students to a NAPE event on machine learning. We are having this career and self-development webinar series. Today is one of such. We also had something on personal finance earlier in the month. I'm sorry, late last month in May. Yes, that's right. We have digital training We've got programs for students. We've got career day webinar for secondary school to catch them young. And then of course, to celebrate our 10th year, we have our annual week summit, which is coming up in November. And there's also a field trip that we're planning in November. So anyone that's interested in joining, we will share the information at the end of this webinar. But I'm very pleased to hand it over back to Tubosun to introduce our speaker. I'm really very excited. He's someone I've known for a long time, but the field I've been pestering him with a lot of questions about carbon capture. And so Tubosun has promised that she's going to tune me out this time and not allow me to ask any more questions. So over to you, Tubosun. Thank you.
Indeed, that's my intention, and I'm still holding on to that. Thank you so much. So if you'd like to join WIGE is Women in Geoscience and Engineering. And interestingly, we are not gender biased. We also have a man. So we look forward to having more men in our midst. And if you'd like to join WIGE, please simply send us an email at the end of this session, or just do a reply to the email you got to join the session, and we will be happy and excited to have you. Like I said, this is in collaboration with NAPE. So before we start, I'm going to bring the president of NAPE up so that she welcomes our members who are also on this portal, and then we'll then go to introduction for our speaker. Madam Pat. I see you, but I can't hear you. Yes.
Mute button effect. Yeah, good day, everyone. And thanks to everyone who's joined in. Particularly, do I wish to welcome the NAPE members. Part of our strategies for thriving and surviving is collaboration. And I'm pleased that we have a partner in WIGE. Also, the things that are important now are that we just have to learn new things. So I wish you all a very successful time. Back to you.
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. So just to go quickly into the event of the day, I'm going to be introducing our speaker. His bio is online, so I'll just highlight a few things. So Dr. Understanding is currently the project geophysics in a focus team responsible for all integrated carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects to reduce shale net carbon footprints. And he also provides QI support to the global exploration and development team in North America. So his experience actually spans swamp, Niger Delta, deepwater, Niger Delta, and also North American basin. He holds a PhD in geophysics, rock physics from the University of Houston. And that's the kind of experience and learning he's bringing to us this morning. In talking about his topic, if you have looked at the information that you got, it is actually the role of geoscience in the energy transition / decarbonized world. But beyond that, it is also giving us hints around carbon capture and storage, the utilization from our fossil fuel residue. How best can we, capture and utilize this byproducts? Because we all know as geoscientists that even when we get into the energy transition world, the fossil fuel will be playing a key integral part. There are even school of thought that tell you that it is the fossil fuel that is given the renewable life. So if you have that understanding, then you will realize the importance of a discourse like this. So coming up from the Paris Agreement, SDG goals, meeting targets, organizations such as our members organizations and where you work are now taking this even more seriously than before. So this talk will focus on our role as geoscientists, roles that expand into storage, capacity estimation. So think about it like STOIP. You're calculating STOIP in terms of reserve. Now you're calculating STOIP in terms of storage. How can we put this carbon in? containment risk assessment, you're familiar to that, risk and uncertainty, and the design of the measurement, monitoring and verification platform to ensure storage safety. On that note, I would like to invite Dr. Understanding to please tell us all that we need to know about carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and we'll take questions from that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tubosun. Thank you for your nice introduction, and in fact, kind one, to be honest. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. I know this is the middle of the week, and I expect that there are other things you could be doing, but thank you for joining. I'll try to share my screen. Please tell me when you can see my screen. And also just to note, you can please tell me when you can see my screen. Is it?
We can see your
The
screen.
screen is up here.
Okay, great, excellent. Thank you so much. Also, I want to give due recognition to both Mrs. Ojelabi and the NAPE president for joining, and I'll take Mrs. Ojelabi up on joining the women in geoscience engineering, especially from a personal finance point of view. I'm interested in that, so I'll do that. If I go straight to what I'll be talking about, net zero global emissions, the role of geosciences, and I had engineering because these days the line is getting blurry between geosciences and engineering in an energy transition world. I hope this will be worth your time. You know, just as a caveat, maybe let me say it in words you understand. I'm not presenting on behalf of Shell. Let that be very clear. This is a presentation on a personal note based on my experience from dealing with carbon capture storage projects. Also, I would like you to know that you can't use this information to make financial career decisions. If you want to talk more about your career choice, you are better off talking to a professional or even finance, you know. Also, I want to tell you that this presentation will not necessarily make you an expert in CCS. I know probably if their interest, we could develop short courses and that will make you a better, you know, hands-on professional. But at best, my intent is to whet your appetite, to go to Google, to be curious about, you know, what the world of CCS is happening, because many people may not even be aware, and that's including me. Before I joined this, I was, just like Tubosu mentioned, I was a, you know, most recently deep water person, you know, and I didn't even know this word exists until I started off in this project. And if you are not an expert, you are not alone, because I'm not also an expert. I'm involved in at least 5 projects currently at different maturation stages, and that is where I'll be speaking from today. Hopefully, it's going to be beneficial to you. Everything starts, you know, has to be referenced to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, which took place in December 2015. It's significant in the sense that 200 countries came together and built a consensus that they are going to reduce the global emissions. You know, at least they gave it a milestone of 55% on or before 2050. That's the big one. And in reacting to that, many companies and bodies have come up with building models. You know, in our field, we build a lot of model. People have tried to build model from IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, to IEA, to International Energy Agency, to say, how do we do this practically, going beyond the diplomats talking and the government leaders. And they came up with different scenarios. But whichever scenario you look at, and I won't bore you with the details, CCS, carbon capture storage, stands as one of the key technology that we need to be deployed in order to achieve the aim. I also want to state, that carbon capture storage is not necessarily the only solution. I'm not pitching a campaign that this is the only way to do it. There are other things we have to do right, including being energy efficient, including switching from fuel to electricity, including using renewables, and a gamut of others. But suffice to say that CCS is right in the middle of what we need to do to achieve that aim. And also, I just want to just share with you, in case you are not aware, that there are a lot happening in the CCS space. Big announcements being made from Exxon, 100 billion capture project, Dutch government, literally giving people handouts to say, okay, we have this budget of 2.4 billion subsidy to anyone that will take on projects, and companies respond to all that, private companies respond to that, to just catch in on the opportunity and make themselves relevant and for the foreseeable future. That's really what we are talking about. There's a lot, but also that's not the only thing happening. There's also carbon capture storage gone not too good, especially in Europe, where the EU has signed a certain amount of into carbon capture projects, but eventually is only one project that was funded by Europe that is currently operating, and even at that is not of a commercial size, and that one is in Spain. 4 other projects, including the one in Netherlands, was started, but had to be terminated, early than the project went live, right? UK government also backed out, from investing in carbon capture project, not from a technical standpoint. Like I'll be showing with you, there's a lot we can bring from our traditional oil and gas experience, but there are nuances to how carbon capture storage is handled, and I'll make attempt to share all that with you. But let's go back to the fundamentals. What is carbon capture storage? It's very simple, very logical. You may have had some people mention sequestration. It's all the same, but what it means is that you are injecting CO2 into geological strata. Let me attempt to use my pointer now. Okay, great. Yeah, so you are taking CO2 either from refinery, from bioethanol plants, or even from cement, whatever, because it's not just oil and gas that contribute to CO2 emissions, right? What you want to do is that you capture the CO2 emissions, and then you look for a way to permanently isolate the CO2 from the atmosphere. The word emphasis on permanently isolating, because this is one thing that has given a lot of stakeholders a discomfort feel about, yes, you do it for 5 years, 10 years, maybe 20 years, and then down the line, the CO2 comes back to the surface, gets into the drinking water, and becomes an issue for people. So there is need to give a comfort feel that the CO2 that you are isolating or you are capturing will make it permanently, will be permanently isolated in the subsurface. And that is where geosciences and petroleum engineering comes to play. We understand the subsurface. We've been doing it for a century now. So there's a lot of knowledge about the trapping mechanism, about ways to monitor how the CO2 will be moving. And that's really where our selling point. But one thing I also want you to know that CCS is different from production. We are used to being the upstream. We are used to being the one making the call, and then we leave the commercial team or whoever is working your company to start negotiating the contract and making sure that whatever you are producing is sold. Right now, the subsurface is now downstream. So we are on the receiving end. We have to manage a lot of uncertainty. And make sure that we can stabilize a guaranteed outcome to for example, the CO2 that is being emitted. You want to give people a comfort feel. Okay, 1 million tons per annum is what the subsurface will be able to accommodate, and for how long can they inject? Is it 25 years? Is it 40 years? Is it 10 years? If it's commercially viable. And that is really a little bit change in paradigm, in the way we are used to working. So that means apart from all your core, geology, geophysics, petrophysics skills, you also have to be thinking in terms of commerciality. You also have to be thinking in terms of communication to stakeholders, how these things will be done. So CCS projects are heavy in stakeholder management and communication, apart from all the skill sets that you will need, that I will assume you would have had with the traditional oil and gas industry. But that's not difficult for us, because many of us we also do this even as part of our routine work. So the key thing I wanted to highlight with this, that it is not just oil and gas, all right? It's also cement, it's also iron and steel. There are a lot other industries that emit CO2, and the intent is to stop that CO2 from reaching the atmosphere. You take it, you dehydrate it, you compress it, put it into liquid, into a pipeline. Think about what we do with LNG, and inject back into the surface where it came from. Is as simple as that. But you need to know whether you have, for example, a seal, to make sure that the CO2 injecting in a pore space that has good porosity, permeability, is good enough to contain the CO2 injecting. This is an example of a power station. Regrettably, one of the projects that failed, in Europe, that didn't happen. But with good design, everything was set, except that it no longer became viable, commercially viable. But that's a bit aside. But what happens when you inject CO2? When you inject CO2, you are replacing CO2 with something else. Usually, it could be with depleted gas, which we maintain. It could be aquifer, saline aquifer. It could also be that. But there is some activities happening as you inject the CO2. And because of that, you are not just changing the saturation, you're also changing the pressure. And this is really my point. So the pressure travels a lot faster than your CO2 plume, for example. So it travels a lot faster. So when you are buying your pore space, you are not just buying, where you are injecting CO2 and replacing water. We'll talk about what it does to water, maybe in a little bit of details later. But this is what happens. The pressure travels a lot fast, and you need to understand the implication of this. The implication of this pressure traveling maybe farther than the pore space perhaps you envisage is that if there are other activities happening outside your area of concession, quote and unquote, say drilling activity, it may end up causing a blowout activity, event, which is not going to be palatable. So you want to give both yourself and the regulators some comfort feel that you understand how the pressure is propagating. And it's not just giving them a comfort feel or assuring yourself. You have to show them with data that this is how it looks. This is what you've modeled. This is what you've acquired. Acquired data to show how the pressure is moving, because it could be a big deal. Another thing people are exploring is people are thinking of water extraction to become a likely part of large scale projects, and what that means is that it may improve the commercial viability, right? Okay, yeah. If you miss anything out of what I've said, this one will be key for you. I want this to be a key takeaway for everyone. If you're a note taker, please, probably a time for you to write or jot something, because this is probably not exhaustive, but this is a reasonable concept for you to be a takeaway from this talk or discussion. You need to have capacity, for your carbon capture and storage. So the thinking is, how much thickness and continuity of your reservoir and seal do you have? Do you have enough capacity to store, say, from the refinery that is close to you, that you're trying to capture the CO2 from, for example, and all those we would normally do with our reservoir characterization. Check the gross rock volume, check the rock properties, and what have you, everything we are used to doing. And then the containment is not just that you have enough capacity, but can it be contained indefinitely? This is very key especially to the regulators. They want to know that we are not postponing the evil days, maybe for our children, grandchildren, and many generations to come, right? So you need to give them a comfort feel, and their modus operandi to do that. You also want to be sure that you can transport the CO2 safely. So you start thinking of a pipeline injection, pipeline connection, and then that you can have sustainable rate to inject, and your fracture gradient, for example, of your seal, that you are not going to you're not going to frag the formation and cause the CO2 leaking. You also want to be able to show that you can monitor, and if there is any issue, you have plans at least to remediate the incident. So those are the things. And then largely, is stakeholder management. I hope I've been doing this now for a bit, and this one is very important. You have to be able to communicate very complex, technical jargon to people that are not necessarily at that level, and give them a comfort feel. You have to landowners. You have to talk to them, and assure them that you pretty much what people did for us. When onshore Niger Delta were for example, we're starting. So those are things that are becoming very important, and it can make or mar your project. Like in Netherlands, onshore is simply not a no-go area because of this stakeholder perception. So I know perhaps some of you came to see, okay, I'm a geologist, I'm a petrophysicist, I'm a reservoir engineer, even I'm a geochemist. How does this apply to me? How can what skill set do I need? I hope already you've already picked a bit of the things that you can do, but just just to mention, you need, reservoir characterization. We all do this together. You need to know, build your conceptual models from static to dynamic, but only that this time you are not just building for 25 years of production, of how many years you have, of injection in this case, but you are building dynamic model for 200 years in some cases, for example, for low carbon fuel standard, which it applies to all emissions to California. So they have their own, you have to model up to 1,000 years. That's what's stated in the regulation, because they are a bit, more stringent about that. So, and that's what we do, right? As a geophysicist, you look at your 4D seismic data with your reservoir engineer, with your geologist, perhaps with your petrophysicist. You do your fluid prediction. You do fault scene analysis as a geologist, cap rock integrity, characterization of seal system. You do your geohazards assessment, cap rock integrity as a geomechanist, fault reactivation risk, everything we do, just think about it, and perhaps you see a clear link to carbon capture storage project. And then for the wells and well engineers, you plan your wells, because you have to drill your injection well. You have to drill the monitoring wells. You have to think about the cost. You have to think about post closure plan. After you have injected, what the government also require, or the regulator, depending on where you are, require that you have a plan to even monitor way beyond your injection time. Yeah. So my intent here is to go just give you a kind of a picture of what we do, nothing too detailed, but a picture of what each of these means. I'll fly through this in the interest of time, because I know everyone, you are all smart, and you probably gotten the main gist of what I'm trying to say here. But you are going to look at seismic data. You are going to do your mapping. You are going to you are going to do basically everything we do, just to be able to select your site and say, okay, your petrophysics, we do your rock property modeling and say, okay, this is the kind of porosity, permeability, net to gross that I have, and I'd rather have it here than have it there. The only flip side is that in some instances, having very, very good porosity and permeability may be a deterrent rather than a critical success factor, right? Because you also don't want your plume to travel too fast, because the more the plume size you have, the more the lease, the land you have to buy, and the more you destroy the value for your project. So yeah, it's only in CCS project you are concerned about too good porosity or permeability, but that's a bit of details. You also want to consider the leakage risk, and so far, having wells, let's say, call it legacy wells, wells that have been existing, could serve as conduit risk, right? Containment risk, because the CO2 you're injecting, if the well has not been properly abandoned, for instance, could serve as conduit to take the CO2 either to your drinking water, which will not make you popular with the local community, or even to the surface, and you want to be careful about that. You also want to map your fault, that your fault is also not, you are not injecting close to where you have faults that can serve as can leak the CO2 to the surface. So all those kind of work we do, in a typical CCS project, and this is a bit of details, so you have to do your risk analysis, some people call bow tie analysis, and then you do your geohazard assessment. You want to check, oh yeah, protected area, you cannot have it there. You want to check, is it easy to transport, because you want to place your, for example, your sink which is where you are going to store the CO2 close to the source. The source is where you say the refinery, the bioethanol plant, and we want to make them as close as possible to reduce the cost. So you think about that in the transport area. And then for your monitoring, you have, it is evolving, but these days, where we are, is you want to have a base monitoring plan where you want to, for example, check the water, do some analysis, hydrogeology analysis of the water before you start injection, so that people will not come and tell you, okay, yeah, it's because you're injecting, or we've suddenly started seeing an increase in chloride, or chlorine in our water. You want to make sure you monitor the seismicity and measure it, because, for example, a project in Illinois, in the US, Midwest US, was stopped because suddenly there's a burden of proof to show that the seismicity increase that they got recently was not as a result of injection. Eventually, it was proven that it is not as a result of the injection solely, but it took like close to a year to be able to prove that, but if you have data and the except base data, you can show that easily, and then you have plans to monitor. Then you have a contingency monitoring plan. So in case there's any leakage, what are you going to do? What are the plans? What are you going to drill relief wells? Which in some sense is not very different from what we would normally do. And then you also have corrective measures plan. But the approach should be risk-based, comprehensive, adaptable. And I thought I should add a bit of real data set for people that will be curious to know how really does it work. So, for example, this is the mean case, the fast case, and you see how the CO2 is you see the CO2 plume, depending on the case we are looking at. So this is purely modeling, geophysical modeling. And then you can do your fluid substitution to say, if I have 5 meters of CO2 versus 10 versus 20 meters of CO2, what will I see? And then you can even take it further to say, instead of looking at thickness, you're looking at saturation. This is a brine case, but you are replacing with 20% of CO2. Would I start seeing something? Because you also want to make your plan such that you want to acquire data when you have a chance of seeing the data, right? Of seeing something significant. So if for example you have just 5% saturation of CO2, you may argue that you may not see as much as when you have 20, 50, or even 80% of CO2. And this is a live example of where we have we've done this. I can share this because this is sponsored by the government, Canadian government. So you see that between 2 years, 2015 seismic and 2017 seismic, you start to see some difference. But you see difference only in your reservoir objective. You don't see any difference in your in the overboarding, right? So it gives you a comfort feel. There's no out of zone injection here, and that itself suffices. For example, in this case, and this from VSP, not necessarily traditional seismic. So you have to do something fit for purpose. There's no time to or even money to be pursuing all these OBN great data set, at least not yet, because you are thinking a lot about economics. So let me also mention to you, just as a recap, that you are capturing, in this case, we are capturing 1 million tons. You're transporting, you are injecting, and you are storing in a safe place. That's the picture from capture to storage of a CCS project. I also wanted to highlight that this is ongoing. Insala is a project in Algeria, which has stopped now, but it's one of the pioneering projects of onshore CO2 capture and storage project. It helps the CCS world, build a lot of experience. So you are having carbon dioxide from several gas fields, and they are injecting into a carboniferous sandstone of about 2,000 meters deep, and of course, well, things went wrong, but it was captured early. That's kudos to the monitoring plan. And you have it, CO2 enhanced oil recovery in several places in the world, where instead of injecting helping your production, you have a choice of using water, but CO2 is much cleaner because of its exceptional cleaning properties. But before you run to say, oh, it's all hunky-dory with CCS, there are challenges, right? And I also thought I should mention that. As it is now, there's still, people are warming up to it, especially in Europe. There's still lack of wide societal support. So and people are thinking of short term because there's lack of market mechanism, but those challenges, we can also turn it out to be an advantage, right? Because right now there's a lot to be studied, especially with CCS. How do we make it economically viable? What are the one of the major costs burden for a CCS project is on capture. And I know, especially in North America, there are a lot of funds to research how to capture cheap, and from a storage perspective too. There are a lot of research into, oh, should we go to salt? Will it have as a permanent barrier, or should we do this or do that? So in case you still have some energy to pursue some research, maybe that's something you should consider. And also commercializing CCS is really not a technical challenge. This is my word. It's not a technical challenge. It's a stakeholder management challenge. It's a commercial challenge. So this is where we are with CCS projects that are currently in operation. Nearly 40 million tons stored in 2020. And we have currently 26 large-scale projects in operation. 3 are in construction, and these are the industries where you have the CO2 as source. And lastly, I just want to maybe one but last, status of CCS 2020 as at 2020. We have projects, there are new commercial facilities that from 2019 to 2020. I want to encourage everyone to look up this, this Global CCS Institute, and they have been turning out the data, global data in terms of where people are, and we have one in Brazil, a test project in South Africa. That's about all we have for now in Africa as at 2020. So there's a lot of room to be the starters, even in Africa and elsewhere, right? To be honest, the United States is blazing the trail so far, leading with 12 of the 17 facilities initiated in 2020, because there's also government incentive to allow that. Apart from the IRS 45Q tax credit, you also have the LCFS that I mentioned for California market. So it's really bringing up the activities in this part of the world. Let me leave you with this. There's a book by Owen Tucker. He's Shell's technical expert for CCS. Is a free book. It's downloadable from the Institute of Physics website. That I encourage you. It will not make you also an expert, but it's a good read. Maybe over lunch or something. And then you can watch CCS in a nutshell from a YouTube video, and hopefully at least it helps you keep abreast of what is happening. That's all I have. Hope it's been worth your time. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a lot to take in That's a lot to take in the few minutes that you gave to us. But thank you very much. So what I will do is just to emphasize on your 5 pillars on carbon capture, just as a recap, before I then open it up for questions, because I recognize that some people just joined when you were halfway into the conversation. So Dr. Understanding said, if you did not gain anything from here, one of the slides captures the 5 pillars of carbon capture should not be part of the things you do not gain. And it involves number 1 being capacity. So to do like a storage site feasibility, these are the steps. Capacity, then there's containment, there's transport and injectivity, there's monitoring and remediation, and there are the stakeholders to deal with. And this brings up questions along, in terms of capacity, what's the storage size requirements? Is there a certain requirement for it? Do you have a minimum or a maximum size of reservoir you are looking for? And it's interesting that we call this reservoir because it's like reserve geology in my head. You know, we know that reservoirs seem to be where we get from. Now, reservoir in this case is where we put into. Concerning containment, then it says, even this reservoir itself, can it contain the CO2 indefinitely? You know, so we are looking at sunk places or sunk locations where the CO2 will stay for a long time. So it's not just put and then go. It is, we are dumping it here or we are putting it in this formation. Can it hold? So we begin to think about our seal assessments, seal risk assessment, our trapping mechanism, what kind of geology are we looking for in that area, the thickness and the continuity of it. Do we have a fault around there, which may cause a leakage? And what is the integrity of even the well bore that we use to sink in? Then he talked about transport and injectivity, and this is really focused around how do we even inject? You made mention of porosity, large scale porosity, or maybe higher density porosity, higher porosity, which may be a problem, you know, and if you think about it, oftentimes if you have higher porosity, you may see a likelihood of higher permeability. Now, containment is otherwise. We want it to stay there indefinitely. We don't want it to flow into groundwater. So I also see skill sets around hydrogeology also in that space. Monitoring and remediation is around, can this injected CO2 be deployed within economic limits? That's the commercialization of it. How do we transform it? How do we come back to check that we are still containing this CO2? There's a bit of structural geology in that. There's a bit of economic geology in that. You also show the slide where you see the efficiency of CO2 as an injector working better than water. You know, so I'm highlighting all of this point to make us realize that as geoscientists, this space we are moving into is beyond just oil and gas exploration. It is opening up even our skill set to a wider range of the fundamental of geology. And finally, you talked about stakeholder. I'll just open that up a bit and link it to what you were emphasizing on, the commercialization of it. This isn't a cheap project. And there are a lot of issues around climate change, the Paris Agreement, trying to even enforce that, SDG goals, the ozone layer depletion, and a lot more. So it is on that note, I would like to open up for questions. If you want more clarification on any question, any aspect that Dr. Understanding had talked about in his presentation, I'm sure that I would be happy to take it. And not forgetting also that, so I mentioned geology. I guess it's just the mindsets of being a geology. So this is not even constrained to only the geology career. We also see the engineers as well playing a huge role in the future that is beckoning on us. So I have questions for you actually. I also see some hands up, but if you like to ask your question, if we have time, then we will bring you up here to talk. First question from Mr. Julius Adeson. It says, thank you for your presentation. Would you say we have a suitable geological formation for storage of CO2, looking at the age of the Niger Delta, and with our productive depths within the basin, since most well injection focused on reservoir pressure maintenance and produced water disposal?
Okay, that's an excellent question. That's a very excellent question. But I'll say my answer is simple: is yes. Because if we can get gas, from our geology, it makes sense that we will be able to also store there. The caveat to that is that we don't want to go into, for example, overpressure zone. We want to avoid that as much as possible. It's not like we cannot also inject, in overpressure zone. The only thing is that it limits how much we can inject. That means we are a bit constrained, because one of the key things, like I mentioned, is your containment risk analysis. And one of the things about your fracture gradient, the more you get into your fracture gradient, into overpressure zone, the closer you are to your fracture gradient. So it gives you a very narrow window to really be able to inject. So instead of injecting, for example, for 50 years, you are now able to inject only for, say, 20 years. And because of the cost of pipelines that I didn't have time to touch on, the cost of the facility, the injection well you have to drill, and monitoring wells, it may erode the value, such that it's not even economically, there's no economic incentive to actually pursue a carbon capture storage. But the simple answer to that is yes, because in Gulf of Mexico, for example, onshore Louisiana, we're doing a lot of work there. I will not be able to disclose the details, but it's at comparable depths, with Niger Delta. The only thing we are not doing is going into the overpressure zone. Yeah, so that's an excellent question, but the answer is yes.
Right. There is another one. Any thoughts about the impact of CO2 leakage into groundwater, like acidity, so that we don't begin to make deformed individuals after injecting CO2?
Yeah, it's not just thought. Like, I hope maybe I didn't do enough justice to it to tell you, drinking water, it's sacrosanct, right? Is an area you don't want to touch. And one of the things you have to prove to regulators and even yourself, to be honest, if you are a company that or you work for a company that is concerned about our reputation, is that you don't want to destroy the livelihood of your community. You want to be a very reasonable partner. So you want that, and that's what we do. You look at the drinking water zone. You make sure that you have enough. If there are wells there, and it's not properly cased, then you cannot just have a project there. And there are several places in the world where, I'm ashamed to say, the oil and gas companies, maybe in the 60s, 70s, they drilled well, not properly abandoned, and now is hurting us because we cannot just do a CCS project in those kind of places, because we have to abandon, and the cost of abandonment is so much that it doesn't make the project commercially viable. So yes, drinking water is a big deal. You have to show that you have seal, for example, to make sure that when you are injecting CO2, there will not be leakage to drinking water, leakage to the surface. One other thing that can help you are different permeable zones before it gets to the drinking water, and then you have to monitor it. Like I showed you, different base monitoring, contingency monitoring plan. As soon as you start seeing things are outside your model, what are you going to do? Most government will just shut the like what happened in Algeria. they will just shut the facility down, irrespective of what has been spent, just to protect that. And if you don't have a strong regulator, then you have to be the conscience for yourself as an operator to make sure that that is very well done. Yeah. So that's what we do. We protect the drinking water, and with proofs. You have to show with data also that you understand where the drinking water level is, what are the protective layers that we assure you that whatever you are doing, say 4 kilometers or 3 kilometers down, will not leak to your 1,500 meters drinking water. And in some places, let me just wrap up with that. You are required to actually drill some shallow monitoring wells. Like in Canada, you actually have to drill those wells, and then you'll be taking measurement, say every month, to show that, look, this is what it was last month, this is what it is today, just to be sure that everything is fine. It could be that stringent, yeah, depending on the regulator, of course. Yeah.
Right. And I had a lot of questions while you were talking, but I'll just save mine for the last. I have another question on the chart. It says, do we have successful CCS projects without governmental support right now? Are there any?
I wish I can see the person that asked that question, and I'll throw chocolate because that's really a very good point. The answer is, to my knowledge, no. To my knowledge, no. As of today, all the viable CCS projects have government incentive, from Norway to Canada to Australia. The big one that just happened in Australia between Exxon and Shell, but it still have a bit of government support. However, in the US, there is no really handout from government. What they did was to provide an incentive, like a tax rebate system. You can still call it government support, but it's not like, like what happened in Norway, like I mentioned, or Australia or Canada. There's no physical exchange of funds. It's just that, do this, be more responsible to the society, and then we'll give you the IRS, the tax governing body. We give you, your company, a kind of rebate. They call it 45Q tax credit, and it could help a lot, and some regions, the states are also doing, like I mentioned, California has led the path to say, look, we'll do more than 45Q. We give you also an incentive if the kind of your fuel, for example, is low carbon fuel standard, that LCFS. If your fuel is so that you are capturing the CO2 and you are selling to California market, we'll give you an added incentive to make to show that, we are supporting you, not necessarily transferring dollar to you, but there will be something to show that, look, that will help your economics, basically. So the simple answer is yes, but the government support can come in different shades.
Okay, great. So before we move along, I still have a question, and I have 3 hands up. I'd like to recognize the presence of the first female physics professor in Africa. Dr. Deborah Ajakaye is online, and I'd just like to recognize her. Madam, please, I'm going to call you later in the evening, not in the evening, later in this session to put on your camera. So help me get ready. So I'm giving you heads up to get ready. And also like to recognize the presence of Dr. James Edets. He's the president-elect of NAPE, and he has joined us as well. So welcome. And to all fellows, distinguished members of NAPE and WIGE that just joined us, welcome. Now, there is one more question on the chat, and I have 3 hands up. So I will come back to the question on the chat because I think you've answered that. and ask that people who would like to audibly ask their question can go ahead, if you don't mind. Is that fine?
With me?
Dr. Understanding, for them to talk?
No, that's totally fine. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, all right, so Olalekan Olatoke, you would go first, but make it short and brief, please. Tune, can you give the three of them access to their microphone and to be able to talk? If they would like to put their video on as well, that's fine.
Can you come up with their names again?
Olalekan Olatoke. If you look at the participant list, you will see their hands up.
Okay.
Yep. I have a question for you, just something to think about, yeah? So I heard you talk about commingling CO2. You didn't say the word, but you meant like mingling, like I can capture different CO2 from different operators. Is that a thing? Is that possible? Because if it is, then we see a future where different companies can actually collaborate on this level and find a site to buy. So is commingling CO2 a thing?
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. These days, especially with respect to the last question, which is a very informed question, by the way. I like to acknowledge that. Is that you begin to see that without giving too much away, that your own CO2 sources may not be enough to make your project commercially attractive, right? So you create the infrastructure, you build the pipelines, you drill the injection well, and then you go to other refineries that are around or other bioethanol plant. We have one, for example, in Illinois. We're not talking to oil and gas operator. We're even talking to people, farmers, right? Who are producing corn, producing ethanol from corn. And then you are telling them, instead of emitting this CO2 and paying a lot of fine, we can capture this CO2 for you, and we can inject it. So it goes beyond even oil and gas operator. The cement world, they are injecting tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, and they are not under so much pressure, depending on where you are. So they are also people that one could collaborate with and say, okay, we'll capture the CO2, we'll process it just like we do, and then we store it permanently for you. Yes, so that's been done.
That exists. Thank you. All right, Olalekan, we'll have you now quickly. You need to unmute to speak in case you haven't. Richard Alakoko, are you available to unmute and speak? And then we also have Bio. So any one of the three of you who can unmute can speak.
Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe the questions will be too sophisticated.
Right. All right, somebody's asking if we can have access to the recorded presentation. Yes, you can watch this presentation on our YouTube channel after this. And I'll give you the information about how you can access that later. I have one other question for you. I'm asking you these questions because there are questions on a lot of people's mind. Probably not articulated yet, but we'll get it. Is there a minimum and a maximum containment size? Like, to buy a site, must it be a certain dimension? Like, because if I have to commingle, that means it has to be big, but is there a minimum dimension to it?
That's a good question, except that there is really no minimum or maximum dimension. Your project and your purse, your budget will drive how large you go or how small you go. So, and you've seen different, currently the largest we have is in Australia. Actually, Australia is injecting the largest. So you basically, it depends. It depends on your. You have to do your homework. You have to think about the reliability of your source, because it's a big project, just like you're saying, you mentioned. How reliable will be your source? Are you guaranteed to have those source for 25 years? Will it expand to 50 years? Then you now start thinking about even your subsurface. How good is your porosity, permeability? How much. Then you do your modeling to say, okay, if after 10 years of injecting, how far will I have gone in terms of your plume, your pressure, like I mentioned? After 50 years, how even post injection, how far will my CO2 plume or my pressure would have gone? And then that will now drive how much pore space you want to buy. So you do like a reverse engineering. You work out all those details, put it on your spreadsheet, on your modeling package, and then you now start talking to your management or whoever is making the decision. This is what I have. I'm guaranteed of this source. I can potentially make a contract to make sure that we continue to have this source. This is how much we have in the pore space. This is how far we can go. This is how much we are going to get for doing this. We will be in business for another 50 years. And this is how much we need to go. And they would decide probably, okay, let's go half of that. Or why are you just limiting yourself? Why don't you do 10 times that project? So it's really fluid. It depends. But most people will, typically err on the side of caution. They will first of all test the ground, make sure that they have a concept that is working, and scale. I've also seen that. They will scale, as things are looking more promising. Or okay, maybe Shell is already injecting. You see other companies are saying, okay, yeah, we'll join. Why, instead of us building our own pipeline, why don't we talk to them? And then you now say, okay, maybe there's more business. Okay, we can expand and expand and expand. But usually these kind of projects would favor the first comers, and that's really the phase we are in. People are still testing the ground, but the bold ones, eventually I see that they will be rewarded, because some are still in denial. Some are still like, oh, let other people do the heavy lifting.
Right.
But the people that do the heavy lifting eventually will be the one to, perhaps if it turns out well and is looking good, get a larger portion of the share.
So on a lighter note, so we can't have people selling their backyard for CO2 storage. Anyway, so I still have a lot of questions, and I think this is the whole essence of this. Are companies or countries exporting their CO2 to other countries for storage? And you can tell where that question is coming from. Are there ethical issues around this? For example, countries that may be unaware of issues around CO2 and then it get dumped on them.
Wow, that's interesting, and we already have a body, like I mentioned, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the International Energy Agency, IEA, that are already regulating that, because there were some practices, people in oil and gas typically are very smart, wanting to, if they are not washed, perhaps, make the best of their dollar, or whatever, euro or whatever they spend, so you can imagine that there have been a few occasions where people will say, okay, nobody will even notice, and I read one actually, a professor in Edinburgh mentioned that, University of Edinburgh. He has a short course on CCS, and he mentioned that in one of his case study. But because awareness is now, getting a lot, so these the bodies I mentioned, they are kind of regulating that, such that people with large pore space, you know, they are not they are not they are not taken advantage of, especially from people that are big emitters, and we know the big emitters. There are countries that are big emitters, you know, yeah, I even have. Maybe I can show a bit of. So I just kept this, you know, I didn't. I don't know if the discussion will go there. People are looking at how much storage do we have, you know, global CCS storage overview. This is what it is, you know, and yeah, there's a lot happening in this space, you know, and but they are regulating it. It's being regulated so that there are no issues with people injecting their emission, CO2 emission, into another country, or even within states in the US.
Can you talk about the legend of this map? What's the light blue? What's the deep blue? Like, just for
the light blue are the ones that have been calculated. How much pore space that exists to store CCS. You notice that not a lot has been done in Africa, so there's a lot that can be done. You know, yeah, I'll leave my personal sentiment about that out of this call, but
the numbers here are calculated.
Yes, they are calculated. They are calculated from this report, and this is you can go to a Global CCS Institute. Yeah, and it's a very recent one. It's December 2020. Well, relatively recent. Yeah.
So we have 4 more minutes for this session, and I have a question. Please, what has become of the campaign on using abandoned oil fields for CO2 storage?
Yeah. So what has become what?
Of the campaign.
Okay, all right.
On using abandoned oil fields for CO2 storage.
That's a very good question. What we started with as a concept is that we'll use depleted oil fields, you know, decommissioned or abandoned, depending on what you want to say. But more and more, it's becoming obvious that that paradigm is being threatened, and it's simple. Number one, you have many wells in an abandoned field, you know, many wells that could possibly serve as containment risk. As you're injecting, they could be a pathway to take the CO2 back to the drinking water and back to the surface, unless they have been abandoned properly. And we found out that not a lot of those wells have been abandoned properly. Simple, you know. So legacy wells have been a bane in making the CCS project strive. You know, that's one big one. The second one, and I would like to stop it here because yeah, I can go on and on, is that because you had, say, you have the oil and then you are injecting CO2, and because it's a depleted oil or gas, as the case may be, you know, the methane is very close to CO2, that it's not easy to separate the difference rock physics wise. So your monitoring is threatened. You can't really see, is within the noise of any acquisition you have, either seismic, EM, whatever, or VSP you are acquiring. So such that you stand a better chance going to aquifer, sealant aquifer, who has different rock properties compared to CO2. And you're able to spot the difference. You're able to convince your stakeholders that, look, I know for sure how my CO2 is, the plume is migrating, how is increasing, how the pressure is moving, compared to a depleted oil or gas field. But that's a bit on the more technical side, and so people are supposedly, you know, is more trendier to be thinking of sealant aquifer than depleted oil or gas field these days. And that's a recent thing. Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, yes, you did. So final question for today. Second to the last question, sorry. What are the drivers for internal and what are the drivers, both internal and external, for a successful CCS project? You want to flip to that slide where you have the 5
Yeah,
drivers?
I think yes, that perhaps would help me. Yeah, so the key drivers are these. You must have a capacity to contain the CO2. It must be contained indefinitely. Mark the word indefinitely, because that's been stressed. Wherever you go, whatever government or regulator you talk to, you have to be able to give a comfort feel that this is not a very short span. You have to be able to transport and inject. You have to be able to show that you can monitor, and if things go wrong, you have plans to remediate, and your stakeholders must be in engagement. So this kind of capture it. Yeah, that's all I have for that. Yeah.
All righty. Final question. It says, you mentioned around monitoring verification, and I think you just talked about it again. Sounding like a 4D monitoring plan. Is there a timeline to this? But I recall that you showed a slide where you have the 2015 and the 2017.
Yeah.
Is that a standard, or is that the standard is still being in the works?
No, there's no standard. It all depends on modeling. We do a lot of modeling, and most of us, virtually probably all, we are used to that modeling. Our modeling drives what we do. We look at we start from the static, we interpret our seismic, we put in the properties, we take it to the dynamic models, and then we say, okay, after 2 years, what are we going to see? Would it be substantial enough for us to monitor? Because it has to be substantial enough. After 6 months, will I start seeing something? After 1 year, after 5 years, and that is where the discussion starts. So based on your modeling, yeah, I can speak for the US and Canada because that's where I've worked. You come back and say, okay, based on your modeling, you have a plan to monitor 2 years, but I see that you can start seeing things from 6 months. Why don't you do 6 months and catch it early? It's more cost to you. You don't want it, but the regulators can come back and say, you have shown us your modeling, we've seen it, and they have engineers too that will probably do that, and they can tell you basically, this is what we want you to do. So it's a discussion. You have what you want to do. You want to be conservative, especially because it costs to acquire data, but you also have the regulator to deal with. It's a dialogue, and between you and them, you decide how often you should. First of all, it has to make sense, because there's no point acquiring data when your modeling suggests that you probably will not see anything. You don't want to waste money. But even at that, even when you have a plan, it still has to be endorsed by your stakeholders.
Okay, I recognize that, the essence of having conversations like this is really to ask questions. So it would be a shame to not take this final question. So please, I'm going to extend this a bit. The session is actually planned to hold till 1. We're hoping to maximize and give you back 30 minutes. So you will indulge us. Let's take the question. That this is what we are here for. One more question. How far in dimension away from your site of containment do you need to acquire land in order to prevent issues from the fast-moving pressure? That's one. And is there a possibility of an earthquake arising due to the activities around CCS if proper precautions are not taken?
Wow, those are, you kind of reserve the best for the last. The questions are interesting and engaging. I like them. So how much pore space you buy, or due to the CO2 flow?
The dimension away from your site.
Yes, yeah, it's a function of your modeling. You still have to go back to your modeling. You have to say, and from what I have seen, working at least 5 projects, is that you see that it it depends on your rock properties. How good is your porosity, your permeability, your net to gross? Those basic things we do. We determine how much of the CO2 plume, for example, replace the water or the pressure travel or move. So and that will define the pore space you buy. It's still being argued that do you really need to buy the pore space entirely for your pressure? It's still being argued, because how do you prove it? It's still modeling at best. You don't really know. But what the regulator, regulation states here is that you have to buy the pore space, not just for your saturation, but also your pressure plume. So that's what you have to do. But you won't know that depending on what side of the bed you wake up from. You have to put in those properties. You have to get your geoscientists and engineers to talk. They build this model from static to dynamic and see, okay, this is how far we go. But you are not doing it just during injection, post-injection, because we found out that even after injection, the CO2 and the pressure moves. Albeit maybe not as significant as what it was when you were injecting, but the CO2 keeps moving. So you have, and that's why California said, you do 1,000 years. Don't just give us a comfort fee, because at the end of that is likely not going to move too far from that. So that's to answer the first question. The second question is a lot more relevant, especially where you have tectonic activities in the past, and there are some. In fact, if you have time, you can Google an Illinois project where and that project, interestingly, was sponsored by U.S. Department of Energy, was stopped because of seismicity, induced seismicity. That's what we call it, induced seismicity. So because you are injecting CO2, in this instance, it was percolating into the basement, and the basement was already fractured, and it increased the seismicity. But that area was already, even pre-injection was seismicity prone, if I may use that word. It was already prone to seismicity. That injection only it increased it. Yeah, exactly. So they were stopped, and they said, okay, they did their geology, geophysics work, interpretation work, and then I read the paper. Is a good read, and then they drilled another injection well less than 1 mile away, and even though they injected about twice as much in this second well, the seismicity, the level of induced seismicity was low at the bare minimum, cannot even be felt, and the reason it was different is simple. Between the injection layer and the basement, there was another formation that protected the injection from permeating to the basement. So if they have done their work, if they have employed me, perhaps, I've done inversion work for them, I would have been able to tell them, look, drill here, don't drill here, but they did that afterwards, and today is a success story. They are still injecting, and it's in the public domain, so you can read the paper if you like. Yeah. So interesting question, but it's something that we have to play by the ear, depending on how the area is prone to seismicity, depending on your baseline data, depending on most CCS projects, you are required to do continuous seismicity monitoring. Most that I'm aware of. You have to have a permanent system that monitors seismicity continuously, because injection is prone to induce seismicity. Yeah. Very good.
Thank you so very much. Yeah. Right. And you did justice to them as well, especially to the question. So thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. If you can stop sharing yours.
Yes, please. Yes.
So that we can move to the next item on the agenda. So before we lose our guests, I'd like to just talk a bit around activities that are upcoming for NAPE and WIG. So I would allow Victoria to talk about WIG and I will talk about NAPE. It's very interesting what this platform is offering us. So in terms of NAPE and our June activity, we still have a lot of tentatives, but what we do have is that, what we do know actually is that by June 11, the deadline for election nomination will be done. So if you are interested in vying for the position of vice president, president-elect, and the university assistant program chairperson, you have until June 11 to do that. The Abuja chapter and all the other chapters as well have technical meetings planned. We are putting tentative dates on it just so you keep your calendars open for either of the dates. The conference, I will allow Victoria to talk about that, but we have abstract submission, which will be closed by the 30th of June. So Victoria, if you have any headline topics in terms of announcements and anything to share, now is the time to do it.
Okay, thank you very much, Tubosun. Let me turn on my camera. Thank you very much. And what an insightful session we've just had. Like our president would always say, this is just one of those you would call the unlearning, learning, and relearning space we've just occupied. Thank you very much, Dr. Understanding, and thanks to Bosin for coordinating this. So for highlights, yes, we do have exciting, we're not done with you guys yet. NAPE WIG is not done with you in terms of providing value. So we have, like Bosin has rightly said, we have quite a number of activities coming up your way. For next month, for example, we're going to be having two summer schools coming your way. There'll be one featuring formation evaluation that would run 5th to 8th of July, and then we'd have the one on petroleum economics, 26th to 28th. In fact, you don't want to miss that. It will cost you a little bit of money, but believe me, it will be worth more than what you're going to be paying for. So look out. In coming days, we're going to have some jingles and announcements about that. So watch out in your inboxes for that. And like Tubosun rightly said, for our upcoming conference, we do have submissions of abstract ongoing, and that will stop at the end of the month. And then we'll have the notification of acceptance that will be sent out to those that qualify by next month. And then we'd have that a full paper submission in the month of August. We've been getting very good submissions so far, and we're still open to receiving some more. So keep them coming. Again, like the EIC would always say, the pre-conference workshop is not something you want to miss. Management session come in November, you do not want to miss that. And of course, our typical short courses would apply. And then my pet project, the virtual field trip, you don't want to miss that. Madam Dota mentioned that earlier on. You do not want to miss that in the month of November. Activities are in top gear. We're building our model and we're making it superbly self-pacing as much as possible. So look out for those. That's pretty much what I have for you. And sponsorship, if you want to sponsor, of course, you know who to contact. The Secretariat, Mr. Lawrence Swag, is on standby, and do not fail to do that. Madam PS, over to you. You let me know when I could say thank you, because I saw a chat from our dearest PE who says he had to drop out to attend another meeting, that I should say thank you on his behalf. So let me know. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. The Madam PS is not patented. PS. All right, so I like at this point to do this in a WIG NAPE style. Something to borrow from WIG. We would like to call on the immediate past president of NAPE, Mr. Alex Taka, FNAPE, to do the appreciation to Dr. Understanding on behalf of WIG. So over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Dr. Understanding. What a wonderful name. I got the full understanding of what carbon capture is all about and storage. And I believe other participants must have gotten a different view of it. You made it so simple and we were keen. The joy is that we are still being required as G&G team in spite of this very global drive. We still be relevant. That's the encouragement for our team in the G&G family globally. So on that note, I want to just say this is a wonderful presentation, and on behalf of Women in Geosciences and Engineering, in partnership with Nigerian Association of Petroleum Explorationists, I want to present to Dr. Understanding Aikulola of Share in recognition of your valued participation as guest speaker for this WIGE 2021 technical webinar, today being Wednesday, June 2nd, 2021. The team #Empower Growth Strive. We're excited about this. We present this in recognition, and we appreciate and we believe that anytime we call upon you in the course of this topic or similar ones, you still make time for us. We're very grateful. We thank you for this, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Some will engage you one-on-one, just like you have suggested. We'd love to hear more, and we also look forward to a workshop that will give us more time with you and much better understanding than what we have had today. Thank you very much. We appreciate you, and bye for now.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate the organizers, Women in Geoscience and Engineering, and NAPI for the honor. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Understanding. The HiPP couldn't have done a better job. So now we'll take group photos. This is where it becomes very difficult because turn on the video, but we are hoping that you indulge us. Please turn on your videos. We'd like to take group photos. Group photo, not photos. Group photo, please. We appreciate that you turn on your video.